Hello everyone. This is that facilitations technique presentation that we didn't get to while we were in the classroom the last time we were together. So we'll go through this. I'm hoping I'll be able to keep this down to an hour or so. Um, there's extra slides in here. You'll see that much of this content we've gone over before or is included in other modules. I added some of the slides from a presentation that I did at the EMS IC Society for coaching and how to teach millennials. So first of all, you'd be asking, what is facilitation? All right, and so we take a moment of time and think about that. What do you think the word facilitation means, and what are we going to talk about pretty much in an EMS IC class? And so the things that come up as definitions for facilitation would be to make easier. So here we're trying to make the EMTs or paramedics education easier. It is a method of interacting with students while learning. That's probably the best definition for us. And whenever I think of facilitation, the first word that pops up is coaching. There isn't a module for coaching in the EMS IC curriculum. And so coaching and facilitation to me has always gone together since I've been teaching these classes. And when you think of a coach, you think of somebody who's somewhat of a mentor and believes in some positive feedback. And as we'll see here, we're going to do some negative feedback too. If you really embrace this idea of facilitation, it's like the 360 in the classroom, the flipped classroom, all of that is facilitation. So here you'll see some of the different terms. I think constructivist learning is one that's in the curriculum, and that is you're having the student construct their own knowledge. A lot of that would be give them the tools and they figure it out for themselves. They have to learn, they do things, they build things. A constructivist approach to teaching them how to use a Life Pack 12 is you give them a Life Pack 12 and you say, here you go. You can give them the manual or whatever, have it available to them, and each individual student would learn about the Life Pack 12, probably all in different ways. We could group them to some degree. Experiential learning is the idea of using the experiences, all right? Getting them into the clinical environment, getting them into labs and scenarios, and having them do stuff as much as possible. And the invitational learning, you can Google that. You don't have to, though. That's not really curriculum. But that has to do with, basically embracing the idea that the student has limitless potential, and you're there to just teach them that they have limitless potential. They can learn anything. You don't really have to be there. You're there to facilitate their learning. To be effective, you need to really adult learners need to see that professional development and their day-to-day activities. Again, goes right back to Malcolm Knowles. They need to know what they're doing is going to be useful for them. It has to be meaningful. You have to work on adults by giving them or getting them to see that they need to have buy-in. So where you're teaching kids, you usually don't have to spend like 15 minutes at the very beginning of any task, activity, lecture, whatever it would be. You don't have to get them to have buy-in. But if you're not doing that at the beginning of classes, and that can be done with pre-tests, it can be done with stories, it can be done with asking people about their clinical experience, all kinds of different ways that you can do that. But you want to get their buy-in first, and they're more apt to pay attention to you. Adult learners need direct, concrete experiences in which they apply learning in the real world. So again, that's why we do clinicals, all right? And when you're able to tie in, not only like some people aren't going to see a chest pain patient right away. So you ask as a group of people, hey, has anybody taken care of a chest pain or a cardiac patient or whatever? And you usually get a hand up. We're talking about the normal things, the top 12 things that we're seeing. And then you get that student, hopefully, to talk about theirs. It's not all your experience. And most of the time, we're talking about students who, by the end of class, while you're talking, they have experiences. It's one of the reasons that we kind of make EMT students do extra clinical, why we front load clinical in the paramedic class, and we have extra clinical hours. It's also they can have experiences to build from. And then activities need to be thought out carefully so they integrate into the total learning experience. So students do not like to waste time. All right, that's obvious. So sometimes a handout where they're doing matching for definitions, it makes sense because the words are new, pointing to different areas of the stomach or whatever it would be. But if you're using stuff that is too elementary, it's just going to be busy work. Students don't like that. It's much better to give them a scenario. And that scenario does not have to be that challenging. I've said this over and over again. At the beginning of classes, you want to stay with simple scenarios. A simple scenario that shows them how to do stuff. Later on, you don't want to stick with simple scenarios. Later on in class, you want that scenario to be a little bit more challenging. And so here's again a slide that's going to be a Malcolm Knowles slide, things that we already know. When we're talking about teaching adults, we have to realize they're goal-oriented, they're practical about what they want to learn. They don't like to learn a whole bunch of stuff that is maybe egg-headed, or a good example of that is acid-base is something that you can't see. Another one is the resting membrane potential and all of that. It is really difficult for some adults to learn that. So you really have to say, this is why we're learning it. This is how we apply it. This is where it becomes important. So stuff has to be relevant. The students like to be self-directed, which kind of steals from us a little bit, maybe your ego, but you allow them to just, boom, here you go for it. And you have to trust. A lot of times you'll hear people talk about, well, once I told them to do that, I had these guys, screwing off. You put them in a group of 4, put them in a room by themselves, and before you know it, everyone's just on their phones, and that's going to happen. You do have to go around and you have to put your groups together correctly, and you have to keep telling them, hey, you have to stay, what would you say, engaged with a curriculum. So we're actually doing stuff while we're here. And then self-report and have other people in the group, when they are kind of challenged by one student who's not helping at all, have them saying stuff. And then again, it's not just sitting in the front of class while you have people all over your building. Maybe it's walking around, opening doors, and making sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, I should say. And so here's a more ego. Adults learning has ego involvement, so be careful of their egos. Provide support from their peers. They like, you can build that teamwork and that camaraderie and structure it so they're giving feedback. They're used to giving feedback, and they're used to then judging others and being judged by others and seeing it as this is what adults do. All right, feedback is important. They can give each other feedback. I've seen so many great examples of students giving really, really good feedback. Stuff that I missed, they'll bring up. Things of, let's say, oh, you didn't do this part of the history. What I found helpful is do this, or remember this acronym, or fit it in while you're doing this, all of that kind of stuff. They have great, great, great examples and ideas when they're giving feedback. So feedback is a whole nother module, so I don't think we need to talk about it too much, but I did throw in a couple of slides here. It talks about positive, negative, and encouraging feedback. And here's just, again, extra. I'm not going to talk too much about this. This isn't on quizzes or anything, but we all know that we're supposed to kind of lean towards positive feedback. There's also very positive feedback for the people who are putting in extra effort or today have done way better than they have in the past. But guess what? sometimes you have to give negative feedback. That's just the way it is. It's always good to use that Oreo cookie of saying something good, give some negative feedback, and then finish off with something good. But here are some little phrases basically where you can use these to maybe blunt how bad the negative feedback is. And then lastly is this encouraging feedback where people are progressing, and you want them to see that you notice that they're getting better. And so transfer of learning is a big thing. It is one of those key terms that you're supposed to know. We need people, after we teach them how to start an IV, when to start an IV, how to do that in a sterile way, how to prioritize it over other treatments, or maybe when not to do it. When they're in the clinical environment, and maybe most specifically when they're in the internship environment, they have to be able to take that information and transfer that to actually what is going on. All right. And a big part of that is starting at the lower domains, ending at the higher domains where we're at application or above. We're at analysis. If they're having to use their brain to figure out, I need to start an IV, but I need to prioritize when I'm going to do it, or prioritize it right out of it and say, nope, we're not going to start an IV on this person because of boom, 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 boom. We're at analysis level pretty much. So coaching is a big part of all of this. All right. So if you're teaching that stuff, it is, I think we could probably make a pretty good argument, impossible to do simply by lecturing. All right. It's one of those things that continue to, be a big deal to me when I'm teaching EMS IC classes. We spend a lot of time having you guys do presentations, which are lectures, and then going over how you did in those lectures. It's a big part of your grade. And at the same time, we all have to kind of realize lecturing isn't the best way to teach people, but it is kind of a foundational type of thing. So coaching is more like as a coach. So what do you think of when you're thinking about coaching? Who are those people? And so some people have their own ideas. My first guy usually is Lou Holtz. Lately, more, I guess it's been Harbaugh. If you look at posters and such, we're almost always going to see some great quotes from, his name escapes me, Lambeau, right? Lambeau Field. So that is, I forgot his name, Vince Lombardi. So Vince Lombardi has all kinds of quotes on learning a little bit, on training and winning. He has a bunch on winning. So what are some tasks that are associated with these guys? I chose off football coaches there, but the tasks that I think of are like running drills, blocking drills, tackling drills, doing a chalkboard kind of thing, going over video, but it's also encouraging them when they're doing better than they did before. It's maybe getting up in their grill when they're not putting up 100%. It's all of that kind of stuff. So chalk talk, a little bit of counseling when you're trying to get them to do better than what they've done in the past. All of those kind of things have nothing to do with lecturing. And a lot of those would be done, they can be done virtually. All right, they can be done via emails, they can be done during text and phone calls, but they could also be done just before and just after class, and during class when you have them broken up into groups. And so when you're thinking about this, a lot of this is coaching. And Simon Sinek, you can Google him for YouTube. He does a lot of consulting work for businesses, and he has some great stuff on millennials. And again, these are slides that I used during a presentation for the EMS ICs where I was making an argument for coaching. And when I was talking about the millennials, everyone has stories about millennials and how they are, especially people who've been teaching for a long time. And none of those stories seem very positive. We've all heard all of the things that kind of happened in the last 20 years or so, where all of the participants in a sporting event would get trophies. No one, I should say, everyone was special. And challenges were kind of a way that it led to failure for some people. So we've been, this is society has taken some challenges away from people to where now we don't have to worry about people being sad about their failure. And that has led to, helicopter parents, I think isn't on the slide, but it's a big helicopter parent thing too. And so what we end up with is entitled, self-interested, and lazy adults. All right, they really want to have a purpose and an impact, and they actually have lower self-esteem, but they don't appear to it when we're just comparing them to Generation Xers or the older generation. So when they get out of school, they kind of have a rude awakening for what life is all about. They've also seen that they're addicted to phones and technology. They're very impatient. They haven't had to wait for stuff the way we, as people who grew up in the 80s or early 90s, had to wait for stuff. There was no immediate download for a movie or all of the different things that you can get in the internet. They've noticed that, these are just kind of facts or stats, that they begin and end careers, or I would say begin and end careers, or at least jobs, more than anyone else before them, where it used to be a sense of pride for those baby boomers that they were at GM for 40 years or whatever it would be. The millennials are having a hard time staying at one place for more than 6 months. And that's because they want to make a big impact. So it's not really big in EMS because right away you're making an impact. But if you're hired in to do human resources, let's say, for a big company, you want to make an impact in the human resources department right away. You want to have something to show for it. But what you're going to probably be doing as a new hire into a human resources department is organizing stuff. It's going to be doing all of the stuff that doesn't have a big impact. All right, it's not going to be future planning for the company at all. So it says here on the bottom, putting them in an environment that requires maturity, self-motivation, professionalism, and dependability sets them up for failure. All right, so it is something that we do have to worry about, putting them right on the street. They will be able to see that they're making an impact, but at the same time, they could also not have a good resilience to problems that we all know are there in EMS. So here are some things that they say about millennials. First of all, they thrive on feedback. As part of that helicopter parenting thing. They need to know why, and I, ever since I've been teaching, have always told my students, you need to know why. Stop trying to memorize things. Understand why something is important or why something is that way, and you don't have to memorize stuff. They thrive with action. They thrive with those little experience things that we like to teach, right? We like to do those small scenarios and skills kind of stuff. They want to contribute to society. They get along with others. That's a big thing, like as far as less racism, less of a judging for sex and sexual preferences and all of those kind of things. They need safety. Something that I found peculiar here is when I was doing this presentation or getting ready for it, I asked my daughter, who was in finishing high school at that time, she was a senior, I believe, and I asked her if she felt safe at school, because I was reading that kids don't feel safe at school at all. And I was like, that's kind of, they're just reading into that. But my daughter, who went to Hudsonville, didn't feel safe at school multiple times, where she thought, uh-oh, something's going to happen. And they are in an era where they have active shooter scenarios and drills and things of that sort. So students nowadays, or I should say millennials, need audio visuals, all right? They need all of that kind of stuff coming at them because they're used to it, and it probably happened to them while they were in high school, and they are not used to failure, all right? Kids in high school very often pass with substandard projects and things of that sort. So what should we do? One, and in this area, so you know, what I did was I just shortened up a bunch of a bunch of slides here. Some good ideas of what to do is give shorter lectures. So you'll see, you guys participated in my class, a lot of you, you've seen 4-hour lectures where I was jamming the whole time. They're saying shorter lectures, and we really are trying to do this more often. Keep it to about a 50-minute lecture, do something else in a 50-minute lecture, and that's it for class. We begin, of course, with question and answer and that big old formative evaluation. Run scenarios as much as you can. Get them into small groups and doing skills practice as much as you can. It doesn't all have to be teacher to student ratio of 5-to-1. You can do it all by yourself with a class of 20 and you have other students helping you out. So bump them into small groups as much as you can and just do a little bit of overwatch. Some big things that come up is, should the students have phones during lecture? And we've talked, I think, briefly about this. And I say you should allow them to have phones, but you kind of have to put a capper on them doing texting and things of that sort, or anything on Facebook. They should be able to see their PowerPoint and have the ability to Google a term that you just said. And that makes some people angry when they come back at you right away and says Google doesn't say what you say. All right, but you should realize the conversation that follows in front of everybody is learning for the whole class. All right, sometimes you have to put a kibosh on it, but a lot of times it is, well, that's what this thing says, this is what your book says, this is what our curriculum says, this is what's most important. Some great examples of this is like the drug dosages. All right, so they'll come up with a, hey, I saw a drug dose for methylprednisolone. It's this. Well, that dose doesn't matter to us. Our dose is pretty much going to be 125 milligrams, let's say. And then one of the things you can do that taps into their creativity and what they're good at is put them into a small group and have them create educational videos and then show those videos to this class and maybe even other classes if it's a really good educational video. So when you're running scenarios, the small group and big group, small group is pretty easy. You've all done that. So big group is, now you have a class of 20, and we've been doing this more often lately, and I've had great success with it. And what you do is you challenge, first of all, early on in the class, you challenge everybody to make up their own scenarios, and maybe 2 scenarios, and that's only going to last for a while. Then you're going to have to do it again and have them create some more scenarios that are associated with the content that you're about to come up with. And then they run the scenarios. They are the teachers. They're also going to be different evaluators. There's going to be maybe 1 or 2 cameramen. All of those things. You just have to have a bunch of different roles to assign to them. And not everybody has to have a role for every scenario, but it does keep everyone engaged. And then after that, when you're running a scenario, don't put up with people messing around. Just kick them out of class. It's what we do. All right, so you say stop, or you're not going to be able to participate. You have to have a certain maturity level. So they can do introduction, tell them what the scenario is all about, do a good wrap up. The students can do all of that. They can explain the importance and the relevance. If it's missed, then you're going to have to step in too. So start with a simple, add critical thinking later on, that Oreo cookie that we talked about earlier, and then keep the students in control. They really learn really, really well. So here's a never give up thing. I think this has a few different slides like this where I say this and that, or take a break. Continuing on though. So the next little area here, and this is a whole area by itself, is motivations. All right. And the big part here, and it came from an earlier slide, is students or adult learners are intrinsically motivated. Hopefully, for my initial class, that's kind of true. They're all intrinsically motivated. You guys, I think, are all pretty much going to be doing continuing ed, and then you have some extrinsic motivation. They have to be there because they need CEUs or their employer told them they had to be there. So First of all, when I think of motivation, I like to set high standards for a class. You can do that for a small CEU class too. Establish those clear expectations so they know where they're supposed to be. So when you put them into groups, you say, this is the way we as adult learners are supposed to act. Whenever it's possible, let the students decide stuff. And then you're going to create challenges. So when the students are such a big part of that, you're going to be whispering in their ear. You're going to be giving them some guidance on how to make it more challenging, or maybe how to rise to the occasion. So some other things to help with motivation, and this is right from the NHTSA curriculum, we'll probably go over it again when we talk about motivation, is use their expertise. When you know that they have some experience, use that in the classroom. Talk to them. Say, hey, who has experience with this? And let them talk about it. Create a desire to learn by helping students understand how they'll use the information or skill. And it seems sometimes that that's obvious, but before you just get into this is how you started an IV, you'll say how often you use an IV. Maybe have a story about the last IV you started that was really important. Maybe the frustrating one when you couldn't start an IV, whatever it would be. Again, you can pull a story from one of them. So be positive and encouraging, give praise when it's earned. Big thing for me when we're doing this is I like to make a big deal out of, yes, you did it. You know, that is a big deal. Imagine last week you didn't know how to do this. This week you're putting IVs in people's arms. And again, it seems like, well, whatever, that's what I'm being taught to do. But for some people, it's huge to hear that they're making that progression. You can do that in other stuff too, not just skills. You can say, you guys didn't know anything about acid base, and now you know this. You know how it relates to DKA, to overdoses, to all of the different respiratory things, all of that. And you have to say that. You just have to say it. Simple stuff, but some people don't realize it. And it always will be somewhat impactful I'm going to go with at least half of the class. So here is, I guess the first thing is, who made this up? Think about that for a second. I'm hoping you all know, and this is Maslow, and what does it mean pretty much is what we have to be thinking. And here, it basically, what Maslow said is we have to supply that different level. We have to give them we have to give them that environment where their physiological needs are met. We have to give them that environment where they feel safe. We have to give them that environment where they feel like they belong to a class, a team, whatever it would be. Esteem, now they're starting to feel like they're good at doing what they're doing. And self-actualization, you don't give that as you're not front loading that, but when you're giving them that huge positive feedback, when they're getting done what they're needed to get done, you're seeing them, you're allowing them, or you're getting them into that self-actualization. So some other things that I think are important is our instructors who are initial instructors need to be nationally registered. You need to have some credibility that way. I like to say you need to stay in the clinical environment too, and that's where I'm screwing up right now for the last couple of years. I need to get back into the clinical environment, and I'll fix that, I think, this fall. So run demonstrations as much as possible. Demo that as demo skills. Slowly, using all of that stuff that we talked about with practical skills. Do it on video and get it to where students can watch it over and over again. Perfect demos. I think that's about it. A big one there is uniforms. I think uniform is going to give them that belonging and maybe esteem. And then participate in discussion forums. Getting them doing discussion forums helps them with motivation. At the beginning of this class, all right, here I've mentioned all of these things. So you can read through that. You can stop it if you want to, but I just read you pretty much all of that kind of stuff, I think. And so emails and social media here, I encourage you, if you're in an initial class, it should be at least weekly that you're talking to your students, all right? A big thing for Facebook is you don't have to do much. They'll create their own Facebook page. You can encourage it if you've seen that it hasn't happened in the first month or two of class. So emails with individual ones with a little bit of encouragement and asking how they're doing. Emails to everybody telling them how the whole class is doing. And then some of the stuff that I send is just a cut and paste email that I use all of the time in the second week, in the first week, or I can go back before class starts, in the first week of class, in the class. Those are all regular things that I've done. Here's just a short video that I think I'm going to have you guys watch.
Borderline candidates who had the potential to pass these crucial phases in training. After consulting with experts, they came up with a groundbreaking mental toughness program, a set of techniques to boost the trainees' ability to control fear, even in the most extreme situations.
You guys need to stay fired up while you're out there. The pain, the cold, and all that stuff. It's going to eat away at you, but you got to keep going.
The techniques that we're most interested in are what I call the big four: goal setting, mental rehearsal, self-talk, and arousal control.
Scientists think goal setting works by assisting the frontal lobes. As the brain's supervisor, the frontal lobes are responsible for reasoning and planning. Concentrating on specific goals lets the brain bring structure to chaos and keeps the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, in check.
I got up every morning and I said, I'm going to make it to breakfast. And then at breakfast I said, okay, I'm going to make it till lunch. And then I'm going to make it through the run this afternoon. And then, you take it in these little sort of chunks.
The second technique, mental rehearsal or visualization, is continually running through an activity in your mind. So when you try it for real, it comes more naturally.
If you practice in your mind first and imagine and rehearse how you might do in these stressful situations, the next time in reality you're faced with these situations is actually, in effect, the second time you faced it. So you'll have less of a stressful reaction.
The third technique, self-talk, helps focus the trainee's thoughts. The average person speaks to themselves at a rate of 300 to 1,000 words a minute. If these words are positive instead of negative, can do instead of can't, they help override the fear signal coming from the amygdala.
The frontal lobes are always on, so it's very easy to think about something difficult, something bad, like I'm going to fail. What am I doing here? I didn't practice enough. What you're trying to do is you're trying to replace those bad thoughts with good thoughts.
The final technique, arousal control, is centered on breathing. Deliberate, slow breathing helps combat some of the effects of panic. Long exhales, in particular, mimic the body's relaxation process and get more oxygen to the brain so it can perform better.
Breathing is a great focusing strategy, but you can only do it so much because in response to fear, your brain will get jacked up.
On its own, arousal control wouldn't work. The amygdala sends out such a powerful signal, it's tough to suppress if we're still feeling fearful. But combining the four techniques made a big difference to the trainee SEAL's pass rate, increasing it from a quarter. The Navy wanted to help border
So some of the stuff that picks up, it stopped a little bit early, I think, is these are 4 things that they talk about. Looks like 3 things. It's 4 of them. I put box breathing as separate. So goal setting is something that we can do. You know, we do that all of the time when we're talking about initial education. We just break up the curriculum into bites that they can take. And then for the mental rehearsal, that is something that we can help teach students, and that positive self-talk too. Here's a couple more things that, let's see if this is going to go like that.
You're giving me this raise. I deserve this raise. Yes! 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 Ah! The least you can do is keep my salary consistent with inflation. Ah! Yes! Why are you going to give me this raise? Why? Because I'm awesome! I am awesome!
that Wonder Woman video, I'm not sure how long that is. I don't think it's too much longer, but I think we can skip over it. That is a TED Talk, and you can Google that if you like. That woman did several different research studies on the effects of just standing like Superman or Wonder Woman, standing the way she was with that like chest out. Imagine a cape flowing and your head up in the air a little bit, or your chin up. And just doing that, that's it. That's all the person was supposed to do. Changed cortisol levels in their body. She makes a very good argument that body language that we can actually teach people to follow will help them control stress and things of that sort too. And then the last one is this arousal control and box breathing. And box breathing is something that I do every once in a while, and is helpful. And box breathing is simply controlling your respirations. I'm not sure if we did this at all together, but to begin with, I think box breathing, I like the 4-second box breathing. I think you can do a 3-second if you like. The way you do that is you inhale for 4 seconds, and then you hold that for 4 seconds. You let it out over a 4-second period of time, and then you have a no breathing at all. So inhale, hold, exhale, hold, and that should be 4 seconds, 4 seconds, 4 seconds, 4 seconds. Some quick math there, and we're up to 16 seconds. So when you're breathing like that, you're breathing at 4 times a minute. If you do that for 2 minutes, any of us, you can try this at home if you like. Your respirations will, of course, slow. Your heart rate will slow, and you will feel more calm. It is a great technique when you are trying to calm yourself internally, when you're upset, when you are stressed about having to go through a testing station, when you're stressed about a written test, when you're going to shoot a rifle, when you need to get your aim point down, correct your vision, which will help your vision, because instead of having such a sympathetic tone where we have a dilated pupil, we can actually control that. So they end up calling this combat aerobics. I think the Marines term is combat aerobics, and that always focuses on breathing. Totally under taught. If you want to Google Joe Rogan and breathing control, Jocko and breathing control, all of those guys talk about having arousal control and box breathing or breathing control as a way of steadying your hand or calming your inner self. So transference, we talked about that a bit before. Positive transference being the term that you need to know for the curriculum. Positive transference is the person learned it, and now they're doing the skill correctly at the right time. And negative transference is something went wrong. They're not doing the skill correctly, or they're not doing it at the right time. To get positive transference, you have to tap into all of the things: cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. They need to know why they're doing it. They need to know how they're doing it and have some practice doing it. And then affectively, they have to have buy-in. They have to value the need for doing the skill or running the scenario or doing whatever, and then it will get done. So classroom layout sets the tone, and I think we talked enough about this. We don't have to go too much into that, but you should realize that while you're doing it, while you're setting up your classroom, whichever way you're going to, when things go south, part of it's your fault. You have to set up the class the way you want to. If they're not doing what you expected them to do in their small groups, arrange the tables where they're in position to do small group work. And so here, create expectation in the students that will be practicing and learning. So we talked, I think, enough about this. So here's your slide for your guidance, pretty much. But it says here, this is difficult if students have been conditioned to be passive learners. And I've had a lot of times, I would say every class, somebody says, I don't learn well in this environment. And it isn't, and they'll say, I want you to lecture. That is something that they're going to have to understand, that we're going to break up the curriculum, where we will do some lectures. I think that you should be ready. If you're going to be doing initial classes, you hear some people saying that 100% of our curriculum is now flipped to 360 and blah, blah, blah. It just isn't going to work for some students. If you want to capture all of your students, you should realize that some of them are going to thrive a little bit in lecture. They're going to be the people who are great note takers. They did well in high school. That was a high school that taught that way. Most of your younger students are going to know that they're going to be expected to be in small groups. They're going to be expected to act like adults. It's just going to be different from when they're in high school. And they're going to be able to function. And again, if we go back to that triangle that talks about how well we retain information, and at the top of the triangle, we saw that teaching and talking about the information is the way people retain, then we have to put them into small groups and have them talking to each other about it. You're going to have to give them prompts on how to talk about it. Some of the times that is a handout. Some of the time that is making scenarios or running scenarios, all of that kind of stuff. Here, have students assist in some of the day-to-day activities. So these are things that I have to tell you, we don't do a lot of this at the academy, where they'll say students will do stuff like clean up. They'll do inventory. Here we have masters at arms. We don't do a lot of this. I can see that it works in some places. I think the biggest part, how this has an impact on me is the way we run scenarios. When we're running scenarios, or when you're putting people together in groups of 4 or 5 and possibly not watching every second that they're together, you're going to get conflict. So we are supposed to be there to prevent the conflict from escalating. So big way to do that is monitor them at least somewhat, leave doors open, have them realize that they're being watched. So you can then intervene before all of a sudden there's a big, unsurmountable way for you to get people to start talking to each other again. So encourage them to work it out themselves, but you're going to have to get in every once in a while, listen to what their concerns are, maybe end up splitting up the groups, but coaching them to get along is probably going to be better, because they're getting into EMS and they're going to have to get along with partners, and a good frank discussion about that is probably the way to go. So establish those ground rules of how to talk to each other, how we may disagree with other people's thoughts. We can say even something is stupid, but not that someone is stupid. And so go for an ideal outcome of that win-win or win-win-win. And then facilitate the discussion between them. You're going to probably have to do that a little bit. And splitting them up isn't the end of the world either. So we do that often here. So resolving conflict within the groups, instructor intervention. You can just refer to a syllabus. Your syllabus is going to be huge then. The student manual. Depending on the severity of the situation, you might have to involve the whole class, or you might have to involve more staff to get everything back to where it was supposed to be. And then here, tips for facilitation, facilitating a discussion. Small groups discussing the same idea. So you take a group of 20, knock them into 4 groups of 5 or 5 groups of 4. Give them the questions and they figure it out. All right, they take some time. Again, them guys just talking about the content. leads to education. So, and then come together and see how they answered those questions. It can be where all of the students have the same question, and then they're going to argue out the end results, or they could all have different questions and they have to present, these are my questions, or these were the group's questions, and here's our answers. Inattentive students should be redirected back into the group. Move the discussion around the class. That's kind of an easy one. You don't, this goes back to like quizzes and stuff like this. You don't have to comment on each person's contribution, all right? So when we are having a discussion and the students are going back and forth, we don't have to say, good job, this is what he said, this is good, this is bad. You can, to keep things going again, and this is like facilitating a discussion. The name of our lecture here is Facilitation. So by you paraphrasing what somebody says and then redirecting it to the group, that's a good way to go. You don't have to do it constantly. It ends up, if you're doing it all the time, people stop interacting with each other and stuff, and it becomes you centered for the whole discussion. Compliment a good comment and redirect an inaccurate one, and you can redirect that to the class. Like, what do you think about that? And then you can elaborate on different answers. So that is the part that maybe makes people feel uncomfortable when they don't have a lot of experiences. You're trying to, while they're talking, you're thinking, what do we have to really talk about? All right, what is in the curriculum? What is important? What do I know is going to be needed to be understood by the end of tonight? So you'll take their answers, their discussion, and then elaborate on that and include what you need to include. You can also energize them by putting a little bit of quickness into it. You can use humor when you want to. When you disagree gently, but do disagree. Don't wait until the very end or the next day or whatever. If something is being said that's incorrect, you have to step in. And then mediate differences in opinion, all right? All of those are kind of obvious things. Encourage them to back up their statement with facts is a big one, all right? That is one that people who aren't used to adult education or college level education don't believe in needing a bibliography for all of their information. They should be able to reference things to say, this is why this is true, all right? So they should be able to back up their statements with some facts. And then remind everybody that we respect each other. And I think we can even respect different opinions with grace. All right, and then tips for calling participants to order. These are I'm going to say dumb things. We've already talked about the way that when you when you put people on break, you say, I'm going to start at this time, and then always start at that time, and your students will get it. Some things that they say, this is all, I'm going to say from the curriculum, that you should have something like flicking on off the lights, play music, use a unique sound like a dinner gong or whatever. You can designate one of the students, or it might be one of those chores that they have that rotates around where the students put themselves back into class, i.e. one student says, hey, it's time to get back, all right? And that brings us to the end of the presentation. So hopefully that was useful. A lot of stuff on facilitation. I just noticed, I think this is going to be in 2 different short PowerPoints that I'm just going to send to you. If I have time, I'm going to show you how I did this, and then include in that how I would put this onto the old WW via YouTube. And I think that's it. Thank you very much. Take care. I'll see you on the 13th.